In this part, we'll look at older Japanese theatres, art styles, and related aesthetics, and their impact on anime. In a no Gobandate superplay, there were often comic interludes. Sometimes these were actually scripted into the play, such as a pair of buffoonish guards who let in an ogre disguised as a woman into a male-only temple leading into the play Dojoji. These were called ai-kyogen. Kyogen generally meant silly talk, and referred to a style of comedy using colloquial speech of the time, slapstick, and rhythmic movements to get the audience to laugh. Hon Kyogen or real Kyogen was an entirely separate set of standalone comedies from No, and often involved some kind of pathetic situation, for instance being tied up to a pole. You can easily see the influence on today's comedy. You've got the relatively coarse, exaggerated speech styles, overblown slapstick, and a cartoony version of rhythmic movement. Kabuki began in 1603 with the new dance or kagura of a shrine priestess or miko, Izumo no Okuni. It went through several transformations. At first it had a women-only cast that was banned for encouraging prostitution. Then it was all male but preferentially adolescents and was banned for encouraging prostitution. Finally it was an adult male-only theatre and wasn't banned, though the men who played women or adolescents sometimes engaged in prostitution. This was the kind of world it belonged to, the raucously hedonistic world of the Ukiyo or red light district. In the day, Kabuki stars were among the richest men of Edo or 17th century Tokyo, and were counted with dogs in the censuses. Today, Kabuki, along with No and Bunraku, is recognized as a World Intangible Cultural Heritage by UNESCO. The Ukiyo was part of Edo but split from the rest of Edo by multiple moats. You cross the water when entering or exiting, evoking the Shinto symbolism of purification by water. This might be appropriate as Yoshiwara, the name of the Ukiyo district in Edo, means source of good luck. Merchants were only slightly higher class than kabuki actors and had no easy means of improving their station, even if they earned reasonable money. Their main outlet was in the decadent lifestyle of the Ukiyo, or literally floating world. This district could be a confusing mess of courtesans, warring kabuki fan clubs, and geisha. Before this time, when a Japanese person heard the word Ukiyo, he would hear sorrowful world, or the earthly plane that Buddhists sought release from. With the flip of the kanji characters, the floating world of Ukiyo became in many ways a kind of mystical place for Japanese culture. The priest of this realm was the kabuki hero. Acting kabuki was about intense and long years of practice of kata or set forms, and in Edo, the form of the kabuki hero was the rough style of Aragoto, which depicted a straightforward, brash and physically charming Edoko, or child of Edo, like the merchants and samurai watching him. Like other impactful kabuki characters, at the climax of his performance, he would do a signature kabuki-ized version of the Shinto priestess's kagura trance, dancing and then holding a set form while cutting a mie, which is a specialized expression exteriorizing intense emotion, often with eyes crossing, and took a master to perform properly. For instance, here is a group mie in a sudden standoff from Skeroku at the end of the first scene. In the similarly urbanized Kamigata region centering on the metropolis of Osaka, which had its own Ukiyo district, kabuki was also big, but the style of hero here was the gentle style or wagoto. There were subtly less brash or violent gestures, but there was a similar interest in spirit, chivalry, and physical charisma. Intense training in kata or set forms was required to play any of the archetypes or roles, each with their own set of forms. The most specialized and excruciating set of patterns to perform were the onnagata or female roles. There were 3 archetypes important to anime available to onnagata: waka onnagata, or young female roles such as princesses and other damsels in distress, kashagata, or samurai wives who could wield the sword or frying pan, and akuba, or bad girls with tattoos and everything. There were also male archetypes. There were the jitsukoto, usually old men who opposed evil with intelligence and divine authority but often got broken down and destroyed. There were also 6 types of stock villain: evil princes, also known as nation demolishers, evil retainers, dishonest clerks, henchmen, who as in anime were often played for comic relief, and evil apprentices. Multiply this range of characters with the 3 demographics of young, middle-aged or old, and you've got a whole range of characters to choose from. The list of characters above is at least anecdotally literally used as a shorthand for character outlines by anime writers in story brainstorming sessions. You can see this in the Samurai Champloo heroes, where the flashy Aragoto archetype is Mugen, and the calm Wagoto archetype is Jin. In reality, these were acting styles, and Wagoto was about realistic emotion and tragic heroism, while Aragoto was about rough wit and populist superheroism, and the stars in each of these circuits had major trouble branching out into the other style. But the simplification holds in anime characterizations. Another influence of kabuki is the mie. At moments of heightened energy, the actor will cut a specialized pose and cross their eyes to show internal conflict or anger. You can see this type of expression in anime, often meaning anger, bottled up rage, bewilderment, or desperate resolve. Stars often develop the signature mie. Signature expressions are a strong element of anime aesthetics, and you can see this clearly in both the Elric brothers in Full Metal Alchemist. Cute also can be very specific to each character in a cute show. The mie often involves a whole bunch of gestures leading into and out of the mie. You can see this mishmash of actions as part of the contribution of the mie to the expressive language of anime, where at times hands can be whirling about while the head and legs do something that shouldn't athletically be possible to signify the same emotion. Kabuki's greatest contribution to anime is probably its evolution of the Iki aesthetic. Iki is the aesthetic of the Aragoto or rough style, the non-conceited, straightforward, rough and physically charismatic Eroko hero of kabuki plays staged in the ukiyo. Iki today just means cool and sophisticated, but retains the notion of non-conceitedness and ease with who you were. Iki men are fierce and passionate, represented by the red lines on kabuki heroes' faces. And Iki women are beautiful and refined or otherwise womanly. You can also see this in the term commonly used for this type of male kabuki hero, otokodate, which means something like manly man. Typically, villains and fighting superheroes like Skeroku or the hero of Shibaraku use this style. You can still see this rough-hewn kabuki hero in many anime today. Porco Rosso, Cowboy Bebop, and many other shows have characters like this. In contrast, the Wagoto or gentle style was designed less for superhero stories and more for tragic romances, and emphasizes realistic speech and gestures. Initially, Wagoto heroes were wealthy sons of merchants who fell in love with a courtesan in the ukiyo of the Kamigata region, which included Osaka and Kyoto. This is an example of a fight scene in the Osaka Sui associated tradition. The fighter is actually a fox spirit disguised as the hero's friend. You can see the emphasis on the character's brilliance rather than his roughness, and a slight tendency towards too much chivalry when he disarms and humiliates a henchman only to throw him back his spear. Sui emerged in Kamigata cities like Osaka, and like Iki essentially meant cool and concerned sensibility, and is literally written with the same kanji character. But in style isn't so concerned with living on the line between physically charming and physically intimidating. Aragoto and Wagoto are still how heroes are most easily divided. Now that women aren't supposed to just be sensible, pure and delicate, you can see how the Aragoto applies to women in an extension of the Kashagata or samurai wife archetype. Think not just about physical charm but also about the line between sexual charm and sexual intimidation, though the physical and sexual are kind of the same thing. And Iki, a more Aragoto anime heroine, and by heroine I just mean a hero who happens to be female, straddles this edge well, and is straightforward and honorable, and may even be literally chivalrous somehow, which was another part of the male Iki. Anime sophisticates, and even the less sophisticated but blessed heroines fit this aesthetic to some extent, from Ghost in the Shell's Motoko Kusanagi to the cool Robin and Rafanami in One Piece. The Sui Wagoto heroine would then be calmer, less intimidating, fun, honest, and more responsible than sensible. Most of the characters in Puella Magi Madoka Magica fit this definition. One clear example of a link between male and female lead aesthetics is in Sword Art Online, where both the leads tend towards the Osaka Sui. Maybe if you choose to view Iki and Sui this way, there's a kind of continuum between Iki and Sui in anime, with male and female leads tending to complement each other on that continuum. The opposite of Iki is Yabo. One popular song headed that an Iki crow doesn't crow at dawn, Kyoito Kyoito, only a Yabo crow calls frantically, which might hurry the parting of lovers. You see the interaction of Iki and Yabo in anime, especially in characters. There are a number of Yabo villains. Basically, Yabo means uncouth, boorish, villainous, and otherwise stumpy. You can see something of this trait in the villain of the kabuki play Skeroku, who for much of the play can seem like a lecherous and long-winded old man first and a villain by proxy because of the boorish henchmen he hires. At the end though, the hero's instinctive antipathy proves right when the villain's dark past is revealed before a group mie. Bunraku, which is where puppets performed to a chanted narration, came first. This was transformed to its current form by Chikamatsu Monzaemon and Takemoto Gidayu, and was very popular for a while, featuring Monzaemon's brilliant puppetry and Gidayu's brilliant chanting of stories in his version of Chohakyu. But in talking about Iki, it might help to look at what bunraku puppet makers did when the phenomenal rise of the kabuki theatres, which had adapted the brilliant bunraku plays to their spectacular style of performance, caused bunraku's decline. A number of puppet makers honed their arts to incredible levels of realism and made sculptures from their materials, like round oyster shells and papier-mâché. These were called Iki ningyo. Ningyo means doll or puppet, and you might more accurately translate Iki ningyo as living dolls. In understanding how this is Iki, we come back to non-conceitedness and spirit. When a kabuki actor cuts a mie, he reveals his character's strength and intensity of emotion dramatically. But the story context itself is that the character has momentarily lost control because of his emotions boiling over. Communicating that unconsciousness in a mie is supposed to be one of the hardest parts of playing a kabuki hero. Iki aesthetics in art is about beauty, honor, intensity and truth delivered in an extremely straightforward manner, and yet managing not to be braggadocious. You can see how intensely lifelike sculpture lent themselves to this notion. There are few straight up faces, instead faces are often lost in an action of their own. The Iki aesthetic is about the straightforward but unboorish display of beauty and wisdom. It's kind of like a lower class wabi-sabi. And common definitions of the Iki hero often included things like stipulations that the Iki hero must not have enough money in his pocket to pay for his night's lodgings. A frozen moment of an apparently living person still lost in their own life is a very powerful form of expression. This embodying of an inner trait or emotion gets other forms of expression as well, in a strange intermixing of Shinto animism and a Buddhistic parable approach. In Japanese art and anime, even abstract concepts like hope, despair, or bitterness often get personified, but in a psychologically real way, as a completely individual and detailed character. You can see this in Puella Magi Madoka Magica, where the heroine Madoka is an embodiment of love as a magical girl, but very real as a person trying to keep a social identity in facing the intense, maddening stress of a task. Many of her peers worry about what they've left behind, but there's never a contradiction between the notion that they've closed off options and that they are now embodiments of an abstract concept. She is forced to turn into an embodiment of despair, a witch, which is a creature of intense destruction, and also has the seeming of a dangerously hurt person like a dangerous lunatic. Previously, when this happened, the only thing to be done is to have other magical girls destroy the witch. However, she is one of the many naturals or blessed leads of anime, who have special affinity for their field, which fits with the Mako Priestess archetype, and destroying her would be incredibly difficult. She then ingeniously turns that on its head and becomes an embodiment of a positive emotion, hope.